was 15 years old when I had my first girlfriend. Her name was Casey, and she lived just 2 blocks away from my house. It was an upper-class neighborhood, quiet streets, clean sidewalks, and the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Because of that, I used to walk to her house almost every night without a second thought. One Thursday night during school break, I decided to walk over to her place a little later than usual. I didn't have a curfew, so the time didn't really bother me. The streets were empty, the air was still, and everything felt normal, at least at first. About halfway through my walk, I heard something behind me. It sounded like a bush being shaken. I didn't stop. I just glanced over my shoulder for a second and kept walking, telling myself it was probably an animal. But I did start walking a little faster. When I reached the next block, I heard another sound, this time a small stick snapping underfoot. I stopped and turned around. The street was completely empty. On both sides of the sidewalk were tall bushes separating the road from people's yards, forming a long wall of greenery. I couldn't see anyone hiding there. Still, the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I picked up my pace again. As I reached the final stretch toward Casey's house, I heard it once more, light, quick footsteps behind me. I turned my head again while still walking, but there was no one there. No movement, no shadows. By now, my nerves were shot. I could see Casey's house clearly, so I pulled out my phone and called her. She answered right away. I told her I was getting really freaked out because I kept hearing noises behind me. As I walked around the bushes lining her driveway and stepped onto her property, she suddenly went quiet on the phone. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Who's that guy right behind you?" I spun around instantly. Less than 10 feet behind me was a fully grown man, crouched low, moving toward me. I don't remember what his face looked like, only the way he moved, like he had been trying to stay hidden the entire time. I screamed and ran for the front door, pounding on it with everything I had. Before I could get inside, the man grabbed me from behind and tried to pull me into some kind of headlock. I struggled and screamed again. Suddenly, he let go. He turned and ran down the driveway, disappearing back into the darkness as if he had never been there. The door flew open. Casey's mom pulled me inside and slammed it shut behind me. Casey came running down the stairs, her face pale. I was shaking, completely out of breath, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Casey's mom hugged me tightly and asked what happened. After hearing everything, she immediately called the police to report a dangerous man in the neighborhood. She insisted I stay the night, and the next morning she drove me home herself. The man was never caught. To this day, I still think about how long he had been following me and what would have happened if Casey hadn't looked out her window at that exact moment. It was one of those violent, stormy nights where the rain hits the house so hard it feels like it's trying to break in. Thunder shook the walls and the wind howled through the trees outside. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. My parents were in the living room watching a comedy show, my sister was upstairs playing video games, and I was alone in my bedroom watching TV. I've always liked storms. They usually made me feel calm. That night was different. Without warning, a monstrous bang slammed against my bedroom window. I jumped off my bed, my heart instantly racing. Rain poured down the glass so heavily that it distorted everything outside, but I could clearly see the outline of a man standing at my window. He began pounding on it violently, over and over, shouting something I couldn't fully hear over the storm. I cracked the window open just a few inches. The man screamed that he was hurt and needed help. The rain was so loud I had to yell for him to go around to the front door. I slammed the window shut and ran to the living room to tell my dad that there was a man outside who seemed injured and desperate for help. Before my dad could even respond, loud knocking started at our front door. The man was now screaming for help from the porch. My dad walked toward the door and reached for the handle, but something felt wrong. I stopped him and said we should wait. I didn't know why, but every instinct in my body was telling me not to open that door. That's when the phone rang. The caller ID showed our next-door neighbor. My dad answered, and I immediately heard his tone change. He said, "No. No way." He hung up and told us all to stay away from the door. When I asked why, he didn't answer. Instead, he slowly walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. His face went pale. He whispered that the man outside was crouched down, pounding on the door, and holding a large, sharp tool in his hand. My dad shouted through the door, warning the man to leave immediately because the police were on their way. He then called 911. After several tense minutes, the pounding stopped. The man disappeared. Later, while my dad was still on the phone, our neighbor explained what had happened. He had seen a homeless-looking man rummaging through his shed earlier that night. When confronted, the man ran off, carrying a large chopping axe. Police later found the man wandering the streets during the storm. The incident even made it into the local newspaper days later. That night, I realized something terrifying. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if my dad had opened that door, I don't think any of us would have survived that stormy night. I was very young when this happened, too young for anyone to take my fear seriously. It was late in the evening, and I was sitting in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. The TV was loud, filling the house with cheerful noises that made everything feel safe. That's why it took me a second to notice it. I thought I heard my mom calling my name. Her voice came from downstairs, from the direction of the basement. I called back, asking what she wanted, but there was no reply. I shrugged it off, assuming she couldn't hear me over the TV. A few moments later, I heard it again, clearer this time. "Come here." Something about it felt off. I walked toward the basement stairs. The lights were off, and the basement was pitch black. Halfway down the steps, I called for my mom again. No answer. I stopped. My stomach twisted. I knew my mom wasn't down there. I had seen her upstairs just minutes earlier. I turned around to go back up the stairs. Before I reached the top, I heard her voice again, coming from deep inside the basement, calling my name. I froze. I slowly turned back and looked down into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, just a black void staring back at me. My heart started pounding, but part of me wanted to believe it was nothing. I reached for the light switch and turned on the basement lights. Nothing. No one was there. Still shaken, I started back up the stairs. That's when fear hit me all at once. A deep, instinctive terror I had never felt before. I ran. I ran up the stairs crying, screaming for my mom. She came rushing out from upstairs, panic on her face, asking what was wrong. Through tears, I told her that someone or something was calling me from the basement using her voice. She told me she hadn't called me at all. To calm me down, she went downstairs and checked the basement herself. She turned on every light, looked into every corner, and told me everything was fine. But it didn't feel fine. Even as a child, I knew what I heard. It sounded exactly like her. Same tone, same way she said my name. That night, I slept with my bedroom door open and the hallway light on. For weeks after, I avoided the basement entirely. Years have passed since then, but sometimes when the house is quiet, I still remember that voice, and I still wonder what would have happened if I had listened to it. My grandpa lives on a quiet farm almost 2 hours away from the nearest town. There's nothing around his house but open fields, dirt paths, and a thick line of woods that stretch farther than you can see. It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens. At least, that's what we always believed. My grandpa owned a small Boston Terrier named Sherry. He named her after an old friend who'd passed away years earlier. Every day without fail, my grandma would walk Sherry in the mornings, and my grandpa would take her out again in the evening just before sunset. One evening, as the sky began to darken, my grandpa took Sherry down the usual dirt path that ran along the edge of the woods beside their property. It was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no birds, just the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots. About halfway down the trail, my grandpa noticed someone coming toward him from the opposite direction. The person wore a large hood pulled low over their face. As they passed, Sherry suddenly began barking and pulling aggressively on the leash, something she almost never did. My grandpa greeted the stranger with a simple hello, but the man didn't respond. He didn't even look at him. He just kept walking. Something about that bothered my grandpa, but he brushed it off and continued walking. Still, Sherry wouldn't stop barking. Every few steps, she kept turning her head to look behind them. Finally, my grandpa turned around. The man was standing behind a tree several yards back, partially hidden, watching them. That's when fear crept in. My grandpa picked up his pace, his heart beginning to race. He always carried pepper spray in his coat pocket just in case. The path suddenly felt much longer than it ever had before. Then he heard it, soft footsteps in the leaves right behind him. Before he could turn around, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth and nose, cutting off his breath. The grip was strong, deliberate. Panic exploded in his chest. Sherry went wild, barking, biting, and snapping at the attacker's legs. My grandpa struggled desperately, fumbling for the pepper spray in his pocket as his vision began to blur. With shaking hands, he managed to pull it free and sprayed wildly over his shoulder. The in-hand instantly loosened. The man screamed and staggered back, coughing and yelling in pain. My grandpa didn't look back. He ran, faster than he ever thought he could, dragging Sherry with him toward the house. They made it inside and locked the doors. My grandma called the police immediately. The attacker was never caught. To this day, my grandpa is convinced that if Sherry hadn't fought back, he wouldn't have made it home alive. He still walks that path, but never again at sunset, and never without his pepper spray. I had always been drawn to exploring abandoned places. There's something about empty houses, silent streets, and forgotten things that makes your heart race. But nothing I had ever done compared to the night I stumbled upon the house at the edge of town. It was an old, decaying structure, boarded up in most places. Windows were shattered, and weeds had overtaken the front yard. Local kids whispered stories about it. Some said it was haunted, others said it was the kind of place you should never enter. Of course, that only made me more curious. I waited until nightfall and grabbed my flashlight. The air was thick with fog, and even the moon seemed too scared to shine properly. When I finally pushed the creaking gate open, it made a noise so loud it felt like it echoed across the whole town. My stomach twisted with a mix of fear and excitement. The front door was partially open, swinging slightly as if inviting me in. I stepped inside, and my flashlight revealed a long hallway covered in dust and cobwebs. The smell was horrible, rot, mold, and something else I couldn't identify. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just an abandoned house. I explored the ground floor first. Broken furniture lay scattered everywhere. Old newspapers were scattered on the floor, yellowed and crumbling. Then I heard it, a faint dripping sound coming from upstairs. My heart pounded. Curiosity pushed me forward despite the warning bells screaming in my head. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, the dripping sound grew louder, like water hitting metal. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath. Then I saw it, a door at the end of the hallway that wasn't boarded up. The door was slightly ajar, and the sound seemed to come from inside. I pushed it open, and what I saw made me freeze in place. On a small, dusty table in the middle of the room was a human head. Its eyes were wide open, frozen in a scream. Hair matted with dried blood, mouth slightly open as if it had been yelling for help moments before dying. I almost vomited. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. No one was there, just the sound of soft shuffling, like someone pacing back and forth.
I dropped my flashlight and it rolled across the floor, casting strange shadows on the walls. I didn't wait to see what or who was there. I ran down the stairs, tripping over broken furniture, heart pounding like a drum. Outside, the fog had thickened, and I could barely see the gate. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I never went back to that house. I never told anyone in town what I saw. And sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I think I can hear soft whispers, like the house is calling me back. Some places are meant to stay abandoned. Some doors are meant to stay closed. And some horrors should never be found.